We don't even hear about a lot of this stuff, which happened over and over to the Muslims since 9/11. Same with the Sikh brothers. So, I don't know how many people lived here back in 1994. Our mosque was burned down. Mm-hmm. Our mosque was built. We put in $1.1 million at that time. Mm-hmm. August 31st, 1994, somebody came by. We were there like 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock, we left. Within 35, 45 minutes, it was burned down to the ground, mm-hmm. which is on Terramina Road. Mm-hmm. We didn't find nobody who did it. We did our best, but nobody was brought to justice. Mm-hmm. So we suffered that back then. And then after 9/11, I can't even imagine how many mosques have burned down here in the United States. Recently, the one in Missouri, I think, was burned down. Mm-hmm. In Fresno, so many different places, just because the hatred against Islam, what happened on 9/11. Those people who did 9/11, as a being a Muslim, they are not Muslim. Because Islam does not promote that kind of hatred. So this, and now, even after 9/11, so many Muslim people afraid to go out, especially the sisters. They wear hijab. And they work in these public places. They got fired because of that. Imam, like my brother, wearing a beard in Islam is the sunnah of the Prophet. The sunnah is which the Prophet Muhammad had a beard. So we Muslims are encouraged to wear beard. All the prophets have beards. Even Moses, Jesus, Abraham, all those. And so they are encouraged to wear beard. My brother had it when he was a young kid here in elementary school at Franklin, etc. at Yuba College, Sac State. We were clean cut, and then he eventually beard. Inshallah, I will have one too. So because of beard, they got fired from jobs. Mm-hmm. If they were at the airport, we pray 5 times a day. And it's 1 o'clock in the afternoon, we're going to catch a flight to New York. It's time for prayer at San Francisco International Airport. We're going to clean up and do our prayer. And people see this, they turn you in. They come pick you up and say, why are you doing this? So much hatred is put out against Islam, against other religions, because what we look like, And I blame a lot of this stuff on the media, not as individual people, because this country is the greatest country on earth. I'm saying that because I go see other world, and I live here, I grew up in this country. This is the best, these are the most generous people on earth, these American people are. When something happens in the world, they're the first one lined up to give. And just because the media has painted a so bad picture of certain individuals, and that's what it feeds on. And the guy who burned our mosque down, he didn't know nothing about Islam. And the person who burned that guy in Dallas, I bet you he didn't know who he was, he just didn't like the way he looked.
We are the greatest country in some ways, I think. I can agree with you on that, but I think we also have, just like any other place, there's that herd mentality. People, they hear something and we just, rush to conclusions. We join the pack, It reminded me, we were talking about 9/11, you said, those guys that did that weren't really Muslims. I thought, how often do we as people, will label a group, and because that label is associated with something else, we dislike the whole batch. And I think about, you remember David Koresh and the whole Waco thing, right? And somehow he was, in his past, I think, connected with some branch of Adventism, even though it was some offshoot. And so somehow in the news, I remember that the Adventist name got out there, and people were saying, oh, he was an Adventist, and I thought, boy, people could have jumped to conclusions and said, that's an Adventist, that's what Adventists do, they, have all these, whatever he was doing there with all the kids and the people living in that house, and then, and yet, of course, that wasn't true. That wasn't really the case. And I think it should teach us, I think these kinds of incidents should teach us to be very careful before we jump to conclusions, about people, about groups of people. And so thank you for sharing that. I think that's That's right. Let's do this. Does anyone have any questions that they've written down? Pastor, would you mind collecting those? And in a second, we'll go ahead and maybe field some of those questions up here real quick. Let's finish up with this question, then we'll do some questions from the audience. And any of you can jump in. To what extent do you feel like your faith community embraces the value of respect for other people's religious differences? You know what I'm saying? Because I think, in other words, does your faith community encourage respect for freedom of conscience? Okay, for other people to believe differently than you do. And I'm just curious. I'm assuming, and from what I've heard so far, that this is indeed the case. But maybe share with us a little more about that. What is it in your faith? Here's a better question, perhaps. What is it in your faith that does encourage you to respect other people's, beliefs and differences? Let me just share a little bit from my perspective as a Christian, a Seventh-day Adventist Christian. And I think, all of us here share the belief in a creator God. Am I correct on that? And my understanding is that, God created us as human beings with freedom to choose. That we could choose to either serve him or to reject him. And if you go back to the Old Testament Bible, the book of Genesis, you have Adam and Eve there in the Garden of Eden. The story, and I'm sorry, we need water for everybody, huh? Anybody else thirsty up here? It's getting a little hot up here. But the story of Adam and Eve, and the story of how God placed a tree in the Garden of Eden, the tree of knowledge of good and evil, and they could choose. They could stay with God and obey him, but they also had this option, if they wanted to eat this fruit and, to choose to turn against God. And, we could talk about that story in detail and why it was there and what it meant, but I think the baseline there, to me at least, is that God respects, he respects our freedom to choose. And he respects us enough to say, you know what, I love you, but I'll never force you. And so that's kind of where I personally base my understanding of freedom of conscience, and that is that others can believe differently than me, and I'm not to force them, I'm not to impose my beliefs upon them. What about your faith community? What is it you base that on? Anybody want to jump in and talk about that?
Well, I believe a great many Muslims have a various American ideas of religions. Tolerance, acceptance. This is evident in the way we treat our friends and neighbors, co-workers and peers. In addition, we have friends in all cultures and religions living here. For example, this is in the Quran, neighbor. If my family is very wealthy, eating very well, and I have a neighbor's kid who doesn't even have shoes, it doesn't say Muslim neighbor, it doesn't say Christian neighbor, it doesn't say Jew neighbor or Hindu or Sikh, it says neighbor. So if we look among us, who's our neighbor? I mean, I don't live where all Muslims live around me. I have Christian friends across me. So if I'm very wealthy, eating good food, I should go ask my neighbor, do you need any help with any food or anything? This is the Islamic way. This is what Islam teaches us.
Kindness to those who are not of your faith. Yeah.
To add to my neighbor. That question will be asked to me on the day of judgment. How did I treat my neighbors? How did I live my life on earth with I live in America, so I'm American. How did I treat my fellow Americans? Was I kind to my neighbors? Did I ever help any needy person in my community?
Nice.
This will be asked of me on the day of judgment. I mean, it's like, I could go anywhere in the world. I mean, it'd be the same thing. You have to be nice to one another, to help one another, and
thank you. Thank you so much. All right, we've got some water over here. Thank you. Okay, so that's a good, anybody like some water? Pass it down here.
While you're doing that, Steve,
yeah.
Your remarks reminded me when we, September 8th last year, there was a memorial service on the Capitol steps for those slain in Wisconsin. And it was on that occasion that Governor Brown chose to sign the California Workplace Religious Freedom Act. And there were several hours of speeches made that day. And, you know, I grew up as kind of a cynical New Yorker, and, you know, these sort of flag-waving American rallies, if it were white people getting up there and saying all this patriotic stuff, I would be, you know, like ready to puke. You know, because it's just like, oh, we've all said that, it's just for show and what have you, and you know, but at this event, when I heard thick accents, lots of immigrants embracing American values, far more passionate about the freedoms that we enjoy here in this country than most Americans are. And quoting from Lincoln or Jefferson or Martin Luther King or Nelson Mandela, it was very inspiring. And, you know, one of the things, you know, I'd like for all of us to consider is, you know, just what you're saying. A lot of times, we as Americans take our own heritage of the values and the things America stands for, we take it for granted. But people who come here from other countries, that's what attracts them in part, and they become like new converts to America, like very, really passionate about the freedoms that we enjoy. That event was inspiring to me on many, many levels, but that was one of the things that, that really stood out.
I want to add one more thing. Why does Thanksgiving always falls on Thursday?
I don't know. Anybody else know the answer to that?
The government said that is
I
the
don't know the answer, but
holiday.
I'm going to say what I feel like, you know, what I believe in. In the Islamic, in the Muslim world, Thursday is a very important day of the week. Friday is number one. Thursday evening is a very special day for the Muslims. On that day, we get together, the whole family get together, we eat the dinner together, we pray for the dead ones who passed away from my family, all the humankind from Adam up to today. You tell me the Thursday was set up how many years ago? How long been Thursday been, we've been celebrating Thanksgiving? Ever since, right? So you think, huh? Long time. So you think the founding father wasn't thinking about all this? Doesn't this have anything about Islam in there? So, honestly, because Thomas Jefferson had a copy of the Quran.
Yes, he did.
And he used to read it. So, when I look at the laws of this country, I feel good about it because that's what my belief is.
Okay. Thank you. Anybody else? Go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to say a little bit about how respect for other religions is so important in the Sikh religion. I mentioned a little bit earlier about how Sikhs throughout history have defended others' rights to believe and worship the way they wanted to.
Mm-hmm.
And this was one of the biggest things that impressed me when I first learned about Sikhism and about Sikhs, is how, because I was Christian before, and you know, I had a little bit of trepidation about becoming a Sikh, and that, you know, to Sikhs, it was just the one deal or nothing, you know. So, but I remember writing a letter to my mother and explaining to her how Sikhs respect all religions, and it's just it's very, very important in Sikhism. Our holy book, you would say, the City Gurcharn, was actually written by Hindu saints, Muslim saints, and then Sikhs. So it integrated a lot of different faiths into our religion. And even today, the idea in Sikhism that we should respect all religions and to be very conscious of what other people believe is very, very important.
This is interesting. You know, as I'm sitting here, I'm thinking, you know, I know that Christians have persecuted other people in the past. We're all familiar with the Crusades, right? You know, and so Christians have done a lot of I think other faiths have done that as well. And yet here we are sitting here, and we believe,